Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. It is Thursday, November 6th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. Before we begin today, I just want to mention something that we're offering at Times of Israel, a series of Israeli documentary films that you can watch from home with English subtitles. After watching each film, you can ask questions directly to the filmmakers in exclusive Q&A webinars that we host. It's called DocuNation, and it's available to members of our reader support group, the Times of Israel community. For more info, just go to timesofisrael.com/films. That's timesofisrael.com/films. Back to our podcast. As you can see, I'm speaking today with U.S. Bureau Chief Jacob Magid. Hi, Jacob. How you doing?
Hi, Jessica. Good to be with you. Apologies in advance. I got a little bit of a cold, but bear with me.
We'll put up with you. It is day 762 of the war. The IDF received a casket with an apparent body of a hostage from Gaza on Wednesday night. If it is one of the remaining hostages, there will be 6 slain captives remaining in the strip. Freed hostage Ron Broslovsky says in an excerpt of an interview that will be viewed on Israeli television in the next coming days, he said that Islamic Jihad captors sexually assaulted and tortured him. We'll obviously be covering that as it comes out. Jacob and I will talk about U.S. plans for a new Gaza, quote unquote, a possible safe passage as well for a couple of hundred of Hamas operatives in Rafah, and whether foreign media, foreign press will be allowed into Gaza as the U.S. talks about that with Israel. Stay with us.
I always say, if there's one thing we need to do really well, it's delight the customer. Our goal is for everything we do to quietly fade into the background so the customer simply thinks, wow, that was really easy. What's made this journey so meaningful is the ongoing challenge of delivering personal connection and thoughtful, tailored service in a virtual world. And especially now, that connection feels more important than ever. We're one nation, one family. When we heard about Hayalim getting engaged and planning quick weddings, we knew we wanted to help, so we gifted them beautiful ketubas, a small but heartfelt thank you for their courage, their protection, and all they're doing for Am Yisrael. We hear it all the time. People are saying, this is the best company I've ever worked with. And honestly, that comes down to one thing, the care each team member puts into every single order.
Okay, let's talk, Jacob, about this, again, quote unquote, new Gaza plans. These would be neighborhoods, communities on essentially the Israeli part of Gaza, the area under Israeli control, with, as I understood it, eventual plans that Israel eventually will not be there, but certainly Israel would be there as this new Gaza would be constructed and planned. So what is that looking like? And clearly there's probably pushback from various partners, including Israel.
Yes, a bit of pushback so far. I would say it's one of many proposals that's been discussed by the U.S. with its various Arab partners and also with Israel. But it seems to be the one that's gained the most ground, with Jared Kushner talking a little bit about it publicly, this idea of focusing the reconstruction on the Israeli side of the yellow line, because we saw basically Gaza split in two with this ceasefire that went into place on October 10th, with Israel in control of the eastern half, which is about 53% of the strip, and de facto Hamas still in control because there's no other party really ruling on the other side of that, I guess, 47%. But I spoke with a couple Arab diplomats who have been briefed by various U.S. officials on this vision. And the idea is to have basically 5 or 6 residential areas that are built up on the Israeli side of the yellow line, and to have as many as 1 million people move there from the other side of the yellow line, because for the most part at the moment, save for several thousand, maybe a little bit more Palestinians that are on the Israeli side of the yellow line, everyone else is closer to the coast. So what they're going to try to do is, I guess, use what they're calling New Gaza, is a term that Jared Kushner and others have used as an example of what can be when Hamas is not in control. And the hope is that that will be able to spread it to the entire strip as Israel withdraws. The tricky part about this is that it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of support from the two major parties that the U.S. is hoping would back it, which are the UAE and Saudi Arabia. We saw Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff there several days ago when they were in the region. I think what's interesting is that these countries don't like this idea because they're concerned it maintains the status quo, that they don't think that it will see an Israeli withdrawal and it will leave Hamas entrenched there. But as a result, I think what they're trying to balance also is not upsetting President Trump. They want to maintain the good relationship that they have with him. So I think they're trying to gingerly push back while not upsetting the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting about it, of course, is that it has a real estate feel to it. It's certainly not, the grandiose plans or that ideas that President Trump put forward back a year ago or nearly a year ago when he came into office. But it has the look of what real estate developers do in a new space, or a space that could be renewed, let's put it that way. So, but my real question, Jacob, is, in other words, you also have this issue of, obviously that's saying Israel is going to be there. Israeli troops are going to be on that side for quite a while.
Right. And what's interesting is not only is it not give a timeline for the withdrawal, but you're also, what the U.S. is pushing for in these talks has been for the ISF, this International Security Force, which we'll talk a little bit about, that hasn't been formed yet. They want that to actually go on the Hamas side of the yellow line, which is another reason why I think the Saudis and the Emiratis and Egyptians who are being asked to either send troops or money to this project are not so enthusiastic about it, because they don't like the idea of sending their own troops to try to fight with Hamas. They would rather start on actually the Israeli side of the yellow line, have the IDF troops withdraw, use that as a pilot program, I guess, basically, because they envision the ISF as being more focused on securing the borders of Gaza with Israel and Egypt and preventing smuggling, and then also on protecting humanitarian aid, less on actually going into combat with Hamas. Their hope is that it'll be part of their entry into the Gaza Strip, will be part of a negotiation with Hamas to try to get them to decommission, to give up their weapons or put them in some sort of warehouse, as opposed to using them actively against them. They're hoping that's a part of a broad project where they don't have to go to war with Hamas. Because they're not interested, I think the U.S. is now relying more on countries that are still Muslim majority, but I think maybe have less hard lines regarding where their troops are deployed. So the countries that have been named have been Indonesia, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and Turkey. But still, while there's been, I think, privately willingness from each of these countries to entertain the idea, nobody's signed up publicly. Indonesia has talked publicly. Yes, they're willing to send troops, but they've also said within a UN mandate, which is something that the U.S. is working on right now, which is putting together this Security Council resolution that will create this force and give it I would guess that you could say, the international legitimacy to operate in Gaza. We saw, I think it was on Monday, the one draft of the resolution was leaked. And what was interesting about it was that it actually named specifically as one of the main goals of this force is not just to guard the borders and make sure the aid is delivered safely, but also to demilitarize Gaza, to destroy and prevent the rebuilding of military and offensive infrastructure, and the permanent decommissioning of weapons, those taking it and putting it in a warehouse away from Hamas fighters. So it shows that the U.S. is not budging on this issue. It recognizes maybe to a degree that there are some people are uncomfortable with it, but feels, and this is a win for Israel, that this is not something that we can just simply ignore, that Hamas is not going to only through a diplomatic agreement give up its weapons. There's going to need to be force used, that this is going to be a peace enforcing mission, and not just a peacekeeping mission, which is, I guess, to say much to the country of Jordan with the King Abdullah there, his chagrin, because he specifically said he wanted to be the opposite, that he doesn't want this to be a peace forcing mission. So that's going to be an interesting argument that's going to be playing out in the UN sidelines over the next few days. It's already started a little bit. I think the leaked draft is a first version, and there's going to be negotiations. And what was interesting is we also saw the Palestinian Authority get involved in these negotiations, that Mike Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, actually met quietly on Tuesday. I confirmed with a Palestinian official with several members of the Palestinian delegation in New York to try to get their take on this resolution. What my understanding of the meeting took place was relatively friendly, but the PA is pushing to have more of a role in this, because what the resolution talks about is you have this board of peace that Trump is supposed to be heading, maybe with Tony Blair on it as well. And then they're overseeing this Palestinian technocratic government that's completely independent and not tied to anyone, be it Hamas or the PA. The PA would like to maybe have a representative on the Palestinian technocratic government. They would like to be involved in the ISF, maybe not at the head of it, but with its forces, to be part of missions in Gaza. So those conversations are going to have to continue over the next few days. I think the PA doesn't have a lot of leverage in this discussion with the U.S., but they do have the support of the Europeans and the Arab partners that are either sitting on the Security Council, and therefore the U.S. needs their vote, or just our major players in the international arena, that they do need to have their opinions taken into consideration. So I think what the U.S. is hoping is that they'll have a resolution maybe even by this month passed, which is going to be a major heavy lift. But the goal is, in order to have it passed this month, in order to have the force already deploying by the beginning of 2026 in January.
Okay. Let's take a quick break. When we're back, let's talk about this issue of the couple of hundred Hamas operatives still in the tunnels in Gaza, and the idea of giving them safe passage and letting them out and where they would go, and the issue of allowing press into the Strip. So stay with us.
On October 7, I was here at the Nova Music Festival. I ran for my life, hid for 7 hours. Terrorists shot me twice. Thankfully, I survived. I'm still dealing with trauma, and I'm not alone. 3 million Israelis are in trauma. They need mental health care or physical rehabilitation. Wounded soldiers, families, and scared children.
Since 1912, Hadassah has been a life-changing force in Israel. Today, Hadassah has 2 world-renowned hospitals, pioneers breakthrough medical research, cares for youth, and has built the much-needed and largest rehabilitation facility in Jerusalem.
Thank you to everyone at Hadassah Hospitals. You've been helping me, and so many others. And a special thanks to one nurse, my mom. I love you.
Okay, so Hamas operatives. There are a couple of hundred reportedly still in the tunnels in the Gaza Strip, and the idea of the U.S. again, speaking to Israel, pressuring Israel, saying, let's let them out. Maybe they would be on the Hamas side of the ceasefire border, or maybe they would be given safe passage elsewhere. But clearly, this is one of the sticking issues, certainly of the last couple of days, if not last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think since October 10th, when the ceasefire came into place, you've had different instances where there's been attacks on Israeli soldiers. And some of those cases have been involving people. I guess initially Hamas claimed that these people, it's around 100 to 200 we understand to be largely its fighters, that maybe they didn't even know that the ceasefire was in place because they're holed up underground. That was a claim that was used by Hamas after one of the first ceasefire violations. At this point, safe to say that those who are there do know, but they simply aren't able to get out. They're on what's understood to be the Israeli side of the yellow line. Now, this is not a hard border with a fence, so some of the time it's not even clear, and there's actually been instances where civilians have come under fire because they don't really see where the yellow line is, and Israel's trying to put concrete yellow blocks throughout the line to try to demarcate it a little bit clearer. But there were some reporters actually that were there on Wednesday on the Israeli side, and they were showing footage showing it's not actually clear in all areas. So you have these 100 to 200. Obviously, Israel wants them out of the Israeli side. They want to be able to destroy these tunnels, while Hamas wants them to also be able to, at least theoretically, if they're going to have to leave, to do so with their lives and not be killed. And what you've had over the past few days, maybe even longer, is these negotiations about how to go about doing that. And what we saw last week was there was this weird statement that was issued by a U.S. official to several reporters, I was one of them included, where they said that the U.S. did, through Qatari and Egyptian mediators, they gave these Hamas fighters 24 hours to leave, and they would be allowed to theoretically be given safe passage. But if they didn't within those 24 hours, then Israel would have the authority, the approval of the mediators to strike. That 24 hours passed. We didn't see anyone leave. It was not really even clear whether actually Israel had signed off on that they would be giving them safe passage. But it came, because that failed, we saw negotiations continue over the past few days. And these are being led by the U.S. and by Turkey, according to a U.S. official I spoke with and a Middle Eastern diplomat. And they've been trying to convince, again, Israel to actually let these 100 to 200 fighters go back to either the Hamas side of the yellow line or get safe passage to a third country, which hasn't been decided yet. But in order to get safe passage, they would have to give up their weapons. And the idea is that the Hamas fighters would actually be decommissioning their weapons to handing them over to CENTCOM through this civil military coordination center that's based in Kiryat Gat in southern Israel. They would be sending probably some sort of one of their 20 or so countries that's involved in the center. Maybe some of their troops would be there to take over those weapons from Hamas and then give them safe passage to wherever they are going to go. Israel feels that at least some of these fighters should not be given safe passage, that they're willing to arrest them and bring them into Israeli custody. And if they're not willing to go into Israeli custody, then they will fight and take them out, is what the IDF approach is right now. I guess what's interesting is I'm speaking to a pretty senior U.S. official who said, well, we think that there's not really anything to gain by Israel simply killing all these people, and we don't think they should be taking, quote unquote, the maximalist position here, that we want to avoid this scenario of mass slaughter, which was the term that was used, and because it will simply risk upending the entire ceasefire. So I think there is these back and forth negotiations. I think we saw what maybe was the beginning of Israel laying the groundwork for caving to this U.S. demand. And the reason I think that is because we saw this leak from Israel Katz, the defense minister's office, saying on Wednesday that we believe that Hadar Golden, the soldier who was killed in Suketan in 2014, and his body's been held since, we believe his body is actually in the tunnel, one of those tunnels that the 100 to 200 Hamas fighters are there, and therefore we can't go in and destroy the tunnel because we don't want to harm the body. Why that ended up apparently not being true is because the IDF issued a statement saying we don't know what that's about, basically disowning Katz without naming him as being responsible for the leak. But it seemed to be this attempt to say this is why we're maybe willing to let some of these Hamas fighters go, because we want to keep Hadar Golden's body safe. I think the IDF issued a statement basically saying that's not the case and apologized and said that those who are spreading this rumor are harming the family who is really working to get their loved one out for so many years at this point. So I think these negotiations will continue, but it's noteworthy the fact that right now it's the U.S. is pushing Israel on this. It's not just Hamas. It's not just Egypt or Qatar or Turkey, but actually the Trump administration that would like to see this ending in a relatively peaceful manner.
Okay. Right. Things that you don't necessarily think through at the beginning of a ceasefire. Okay. Let's talk about the press in letting the press into Gaza. So that's been another issue that the Trump administration has been pushing Israel on. As we all know, press has not really, for the most part, been allowed into Gaza for the last 2 years. So where does this really stand right now, Jacob? What's the likelihood of it becoming a more open passage for press to come into Gaza?
I mean, I think more likely than we were during the war. And to be clear, there has been what press has been able to do, mainly Israeli press, but a little bit foreign as well, has been on these IDF embeds that our colleague Manny has gone on quite a few of them. But that's where you're with
Laser 2.
And Laser 2.
Yeah.
Shout out to Laser.
Yeah.
Where you're with the Israeli forces in areas that are largely vacant of any Palestinians. They've been cleared of also Hamas fighters. They're seen as relatively safe. The Israeli argument for not allowing journalists is that it simply is not safe, and that therefore, even if what they did start to do, I think this week was allow journalists into the Israeli side of the yellow line of Gaza, but still not to the other side. And I think what we've seen is this push by the Foreign Press Association and other journalist organizations in Israel and abroad saying, look, we're willing to take the risk. It's an important that war correspondents are a part of life, and there's many people who are willing to do it. It's important for the concept of freedom of the press and for us to be able to properly cover what's happening in Gaza, especially if Israel is telling us we can't trust what's coming out of the Gaza health authorities that are run by Hamas. So we should be able to at least we should be able to verify what both sides are saying on our own and do so independently and not just on an IDF embed. So there's been this court case that's been going on for the past over a year where basically it's been drawn out with constant delays over, I think it was at the end of October. There was one more request to make a decision on this. And I think what we're seeing is now the state gave basically the government 30 days to justify why, now that you have a ceasefire in place, that you shouldn't be able to allow journalists to operate a little bit more independently. And against that backdrop, we're seeing the U.S. actually weigh in on this again. You had President Trump mention that he would like to see journalists coming into Gaza and report more freely when he was asked about it. I think it was in August. And when I spoke with two U.S. officials over the past week, they said that they've actually re-raised this issue since the ceasefire has come into place. They feel that we're in a bit different place now, where that the situation is a little bit more stable, and that justifies allowing press to operate more freely in Gaza. But what one of the senior U.S. officials I spoke with did acknowledge was that this isn't really maybe the top priority issue for the Trump administration right now. And maybe hinting a little bit that therefore they're not putting a ton of pressure on Israel to maybe move on this issue in a direction that they're not comfortable with. I think that's something ideally maybe that certain U.S. officials would like to see, but I don't think this is going to be something that President Trump is going to be raising in his conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It'll probably be more up to the court and its decision once the government responds in the next few weeks of whether it's more comfortable changing its policy. But I think it'll be more likely settled in the courts than maybe in the White House.
Yeah, seems likely. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of this Daily Briefing podcast, Jacob.
Yes, thanks for having me, Jessica.
For sure. Thanks for being here. And thanks to you for listening to the Times Visuals Daily Briefing. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. As always, any comments you have, drop us an email at podcast@timesvisual.com. Until next time, take care, be well. See you soon.